but if at any time you find that you don't have something, we have extras up here, so let us know.
And also the water at the tables is for you to have during the presentation, after, whenever you would like it.
All right, welcome. Thanks for coming in so quickly, guys. Today we're going to be doing a workshop of Professionals Abroad, Understanding Intercultural Engagement. My name's Sarah.
I'm Paige.
I'm Li-Xian.
So Li-Xian is going to get us started with the objectives.
Here is the objective of today's workshop. Be able to recognize the symptoms of culture shock as it occurs in a new professional environment abroad. Be able to understand the intercultural development continuum and connect this to culture shock. Be able to discuss possible strategies for encountering issues of cultural engagement. Be able to apply strategies for encountering issues of cultural engagement to a specific scenario.
Okay, so at this point, I want you to find the sheet on your table that's labeled scenarios. So each have a copy. So what we're going to do with this is, this is an imagined scenario that we want you to keep in mind throughout the entire duration of the workshop. We're not going to talk about this from this point forward as imagined. This is going to be your upcoming new job role in either Namibia, Russia, Uruguay, or the United Arab Emirates. We want you to remember that this is an imagined scenario, but you are still you, and you bring all of your experiences to this workshop as well. And if at any point you have a question about what this scenario has to do with something, pull one of us aside and we can explain it to you. But basically, you are going to be moving very soon to one of these new countries for a new job that's outlined there. And this workshop is to help you engage better in this new environment. Does anyone have questions right now? No? Okay.
Go ahead and take some time, just 60 seconds or so, to read through your scenario so you know what you will be doing.
And if you finish reading through, then you can go ahead and talk about it at your table. If you have any questions about the particular job role, like clarify things with each other, discuss in general. Yeah. It's in the content work. So that one is important.
Yeah.
You're moving in a week. You need to go get your shots.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that work? We too. Yeah, it's 5 weeks of conference. I don't know. Very intense. We can visit yourself afterwards. In Southern Africa, it used to be Germany. Yes, right. That's why German is included in the language. So there's a lot of different that's interesting. I just what he would do. Yeah. That was a big deal. No, so it's a different kind of their culture in the US. Yeah, just do like a Wikipedia. Yes, for sure.
Okay, we're gonna have a lot more time to talk about your new job roles later. So let's turn our attention to Li Xian. She's gonna introduce the video clip.
Okay, we will show you guys a video clip which is from a film, My Big Fat Great Wedding. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this film. And it's about a Euro-American guy, Ian, fall in love with American Greek girl, Tula, and they will get married. And this clip depicts the first time Ian meets Tula's big extended family at a Great Eastern celebration. So while you're watching the video, please pay attention to the intercultural engagement depicted in the film.
Okay. When you come to my house and I cook for you.
Okay.
Yeah, that might be a problem.
What's the problem? I'm the best cook in the family, Daddy.
Oh, I did, didn't I?
Twice.
Okay then. It's just, yeah. Ian is a vegetarian. He doesn't eat meat.
He don't eat no meat.
No, he doesn't eat meat.
What do you mean he don't eat no meat? Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I make lamb. Come.
Okay, in this clip we could see Ian is interact with Greek culture of his girlfriend, and we know Ian is from a small Euro-American family. So how is Tula's family different? The difference could be something like very obvious, or could something really subtle. Yeah.
Well, first of all, they're big, not small. And second of all, they don't really understand vegetarianism.
Yes. Yeah, vegetarian is not something that we can normally see in Greek culture. Anyone else?
There seemed to be some kind of difference about personal contact, because she was like kind of holding onto his face for longer than he was comfortable with.
Yeah. So it's not something he's really familiar with.
Yeah.
And anyone else? It could be something big like religious belief, but it could also be something really small like small gestures. expressions, or even like humor.
It seems to me that Greek families use like feeding their family members as a way to show affection. She kept talking about she's gonna cook for him.
Yeah, the way they show their warmness or they show their welcome is a little bit different from like traditional American family. And how do you think he is internally reacting to the interactions at this Greek Easter celebration? Does he seem angry or upset or excited or something else?
Definitely not angry, maybe a little confused and a little interested or amused from the look on his face.
Yeah, he definitely does not show too much negative attitude toward it. He's trying to interact with it, trying to make himself adapt to it.
I would maybe describe it as he's being lost in the situation.
Yeah, a little bit lost. Or do you think Tula is actually the one a little bit worried? Why do you think Tula is worried?
I guess she seems like to be the mediator between the two relationships because she, like, well, I've seen the movie, but she grows up in America, so she, like, is aware of, like, more European American values, I guess. But, like, she knows that her aunt won't necessarily understand it, so she has to, like, make both parties, like, understand each other, which can be kind of awkward.
Yeah, she thinks there must be something really different. So she's worried about there might be something culture shock his boyfriend may experience in her family, anyone else. And based on your understanding of this film clip and your own experience, do you think can a person experience culture shock in his or her own home country as well as outside his or her own home country?
I think definitely outside of your own home country, you're more likely to experience culture shock. Like when I was in Greece, I kind of experienced the same thing because well, we were like dining in some places, somebody accidentally broke a glass on the ground, and everyone just kind of started to applaud, and we really don't know why. I was so confused.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So that's something you actually experience outside your country. So does anyone? Yeah.
I think it can happen within the country as well. Like if you move to a different city or even meet a new group of people, sometimes you may encounter things you're just not familiar with that you have to adjust to, or they surprise you.
Yeah. So do anyone have any experience that experience a kind of culture shock in your own country?
Within our own culture?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, really?
So I moved from Western Germany to Bavaria in the south, which is completely different. So the dialect is different, the traditions are different, and I needed some time to adjust. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely possible that we could experience culture shock in our country. So just be mentally prepared for this kind of culture shock. It could take place at any place, at any time. Yes. And we have shown you guys a video, and in this video we have seen an example of culture shock. And next we'll move on to your personal experience after they will give you a definition.
Okay, so thank you, Li-Shan. That was awesome. Just a short working definition of culture shock that we're using for our purposes. We came across so many, so we recognize that this is not the only definition that you could use. But just a bit of context. Burden said that culture shock is the confusion, disorientation, and emotional upheaval that comes from immersion in a new culture, which is not necessarily negative. Like Li-Shan was just talking about, Ian doesn't actually seem upset or angry or even confused. He kind of seems like he's having a good time. Tula is actually the one who seems to be a little bit embarrassed and threatened. And we want to keep in mind that culture shock, while it generally has a negative connotation, can actually be somewhat positive. And we're going to continue to talk about cultural engagement in terms of both negative and positive interactions. So now we want you to take the sheet on your table that says personal reflections. This is a 3-part handout. So you're just going to go through this individually, and then we may have time for a table discussion. But try to keep in mind the clip that you've just seen as well as the definition of culture shock that was just discussed. And you're going to be using the keywords that you come up with at the bottom in future activities. So try to come up with at least 2. you're done, you can share something that you feel comfortable sharing at your table about your past experience.
Alright guys, we're gonna come back together as a group. We're gonna come back together as a group now. You're definitely going to have more time to reference back to the personal reflection sheets. But now Sarah is going to give you a brief content presentation on recognizing culture shock.
So we wanted you to reflect first so that you can use your own experiences from past encounters with new cultures in either your home country or abroad to talk about what you're going to maybe experience or talk about strategies for engaging with this new culture that you're about to move into for your new job role. But before we can do that, we have to recognize what is culture shock. And this list is obviously, again, not exhaustive. These are things that were salient to me, Paige, and Li-Xin as 3 people who have all lived and worked abroad, and also came out in the research that we looked at. So the first thing that I think is the most obvious is like extreme feelings. You know, the red color and aggressive font. Extreme anger, extreme sadness, extreme awe, stress. Things that are not your usual level of emotion. If you're crying continually every day, or if you encounter something that is upsetting and you react by blowing up at a person, those could be symptoms of culture shock and not just normal emotions. The second is this idea that one individual's behavior that you come across represents an entire culture. And that could be something negative or positive. You know, okay, so I'm walking down the street and I see a person screaming at their child. Does that represent the entire culture? Do all parents behave in that way? It's something to reflect on. Also, obsessions. For instance, I found living in China that I love all Chinese food. Baozi, like dumplings especially. And I would eat them obsessively every single day, and I started thinking like, wow, Chinese culture, Chinese food, so much better than where I come from, and doing a kind of comparison in my mind. And then the last one, constant venting, especially in a work environment. If every single day you go out for drinks with your coworker in Namibia and you just go on and on and on, Julia, maybe you're just so upset that you have to wear so much sunscreen. So you're just like, oh, this is really ruining my skin. Or in Russia, maybe you're so cold. And it just becomes a burden on you. Does anyone have any specific experience with any of these that they want to share, or an additional symptom of culture shock? Yeah?
I mean, you sort of touched on it, but I guess my biggest two words too that came out were intimidated and overwhelmed.
Mm.
Because I think that those are pretty powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe those could fall into the extreme emotions category.
Right.
Overwhelmed in a negative way.
It can be both. I mean, so intimidated was more of my negative overwhelmed word, and overwhelmed like more positive of like that could be awe, but I feel like intimidated is a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not that I didn't feel like that was quite represented there, and so that's why.
Yeah, definitely. A feeling like maybe you don't fit into the culture.
Right.
Yeah.
And you want to, but you can't. Like you feel sort of almost blocked.
Yeah. Okay. Julia, did you?
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar to that, but I guess to add on to that, just like a feeling of homesickness.
Mhm.
Like if you don't feel like you belong, you're like, oh, well maybe I shouldn't have come here at all, blah blah.
Yeah, and homesickness can come out in a lot of different ways. Maybe crying every day at work, maybe not spending enough time on your responsibilities and instead researching restaurants that you used to go to at home or something like that. Yeah, did I see a hand?
Yeah, I was just gonna, this is kind of close to what she was saying about homesickness, but just feeling really lonely or isolated, especially if you're like the only one from your culture in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Just feeling like you're the only one.
Yeah, another like extreme feeling. Of course, you're probably not the only one.
Yeah.
You can probably find commonality between other people, even if you're not all from California. But sometimes it does feel like you are alone.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you. So Paige is going to introduce a framework that you're going to see actually drawn behind you here on this board to help us understand how symptoms of culture shock relate to cultural engagement, and then we'll move on to strategies for engaging.
Okay, so I'm going to begin by introducing this framework. We have it up here, so you don't have to worry about looking back at the board just yet. We'll be using that for an activity later.
It's also in your handout.
Yes, we also have a sheet of notes. So because it is a little bit dense, don't worry about taking notes as to what I'm saying or what's written up here. Most of this is on the handout, and there will be plenty of time for questions and discussion about it as well. So what is this continuum? It's broken up into 5 stages, and it was created as an adaptation of the seminal theory and a development model of intercultural sensitivity. Those two things are used both by psychologists and interculturalists, and was adapted by Milton Bennett and Mitchell Hammer to form what is now referred to as the intercultural development continuum. So how to view this continuum? If you see up here, I have the addition of the word difference. So you're differentiating between your home culture and the culture to which you have traveled. So denial of the differences between the two cultures, polarization of those differences, so kind of considering them at a more extreme level, minimization of the differences, maybe not like suppressing any difference at all, acceptance of those differences, and adaptation to the differences. So to focus a little bit more on the stages together, denial and polarization fall into a monocultural mindset, where you're considering only your own culture's views as your central reality. The stages acceptance and adaptation would be considered a more intercultural mindset, and they represent one's ability to shift perspective and adapt behavior to specific cultural contexts accordingly. So that leaves minimization. Where does this fall? This one's slightly tricky because it is a transitional phase, moving you from monocultural to intercultural. It highlights the commonality and universal principles that you can see between your own culture and the new culture, and can be referred to as a strategy to get by in cultural differences and things you may not consider are your own. The transitional phase minimization is where basic cultural differences such as greetings might come easily to you, but some more complex cultural differences such as shared values or conflict resolution patterns may still seem a little bit difficult. So you might be wondering how this relates at all to culture shock. Earlier, we gave you the definition that culture shock is the confusion, disorientation, and emotional upheaval that comes from immersion in a new culture. Throughout immersion, you're likely to experience certain events, positive or negative, that are going to affect the way you view your own culture and the host culture. These can be developing opinions, they can be making assumptions, they can be agreeing and disagreeing with certain values you may consider the host culture to have. At this time, the reaction of that experiencer, of the individual who is experiencing it, you're able to place somewhere on this continuum. So how someone reacts, what their assumption was, what their opinion was, how they felt in that time, is how you're able to place yourself on this continuum in terms of an immersion experience. A few notes about the continuum. It was made as a tool to aid in intercultural development. It's really used in a very predominant way for study abroad students and those who study the kind of how worth it is to really totally immerse yourself in a study abroad program. It's also used for intercultural development in businesses. So sending people abroad, it's definitely something that they show to consider what you might be feeling at a certain time. Also important to consider that no stage of the continuum is inherently bad. If you are constantly feeling denial of this other culture, it's not bad. It's just a way to kind of place yourself on here and understand more about maybe this culture is not something that you're going to thrive in, and that's okay. So it's important to understand that if you lean more monocultural with your specific host society, that's okay. It's not a bad thing. It's also important to remember that it's highly unlikely for one to reach adaptation without being in a certain location for an extended period of time. Adaptation is kind of the adaptation of another culture's values and their ways of doing things, their common practices, day-to-day common practices. And adaptation is really when you can say, I do this here, but when I go home, I do this. Okay, so we're going to continue with a little bit more explanation of each of the stages and some example sentences as well. So for denial, you're missing or avoiding the difference. I don't really care about fill in the blank there. Polarization is judging the differences, but more simplistically. So like I said, focusing